preach to you in the name of one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Good morning. It's great to see all of you here today. So last week I was ordained a priest and did my very first Eucharist with y'all, and now I'm here preaching and celebrating, and I'm just really in awe of all of your generosity and all of your welcome, so thank you. So just a little something about me. I was a religious studies major in college, and by my senior year I just got very disillusioned with the whole thing. I got very active in the outreach program, and I became engaged in the community, and I thought I was going to learn a lot about justice and how to live in the world by being a religious studies major, and I just kind of felt let down. All the stuff we were learning was just so abstract, and at the time it seemed so useless. And so after college, I knew that I wanted to become a priest, and I knew I wanted to go to seminary. But it takes 2 or 3 years before you can even start thinking about going to seminary. So I had all of this time on my hands, and I needed to make money, and I knew I wanted to do some very practical good in the world. So I started going to EMT school. And so in a year I was an EMT, and I was driving an ambulance, and I was just so excited to be doing this, and to go out in the world and be a Christian in a really radical way. And I was going to make friends with everyone. I was going to be like this hero guy, right? And I just learned very, very quickly that loving someone rarely, well, no, not rarely, but sometimes it does not mean being nice to them at all. And it definitely does not mean being liked. This is really loud. Is that better? Okay, maybe. And so on the ambulance, my job, my act of love was to take care of my patients. And so we would get put in these incredibly broken situations, car accidents, domestic abuse, all of these terrible, terrible things. And we would learn to function in there. And when bad things happen like that, people don't act the way you see them walking down the sidewalk. All of those facades, that act just falls apart. Sometimes people panic. Sometimes people feel like they need to be in control. Sometimes inner aggression comes out. And as the person on the scene, you need to be in control. Because my act of love is to take care of my patients. So I learned how to be me. I learned how to use this authority that I didn't know I had. You know, your body structure, your body changes. Your shoulders get broad. When someone you think is going to mess with your patient, you bow up to them. And you let them know who's in charge. And you let them know that they're not going to interfere. You have to kick people out of your ambulance. You have to get people arrested to keep your patients safe. And so I kind of developed this attitude, and slowly I grew to like it. I grew to like this authority that I had. I was wearing a uniform. I was going out there, and I was taking charge of chaotic situations. I was trying to bring order to them, and I thought this was so very noble. And then I went to seminary. And in seminary, you get a field education placement. And so you apply to all these different churches, and there are so many Episcopal churches in Washington, D.C. It's crazy. And you can get all these different experiences. But there was this one church I heard about, the Church of the Epiphany. It's in downtown Washington, D.C., and they do this very radical ministry to the poor, where their entire congregation is made up of homeless men and women. The choir is all homeless, and they have an art program. They even publish their own newspaper written by homeless people. And it was fantastic, and I knew I wanted to be a part of this and learn something from there. And I was ready to shed that kind of hard person that I'd become and become a minister of God. And so I applied, and I got in, and I was just thrilled. And my very first Sunday there, I got in, I was shaking hands, I was meeting people, I was being a nice guy again. And I go to the bathroom, and I'm face to face with this giant naked man bathing in the sink. And it was just outrageous. And at first I tried to be nice, and then afterwards I walked out, and I went up to the head priest. I was like, there's a naked guy in the bathroom. He's like, oh my gosh, all right, so this happens occasionally, Nick. You have to stop it. You know, I respect these people's need to be clean and their desire to be clean, but this is not the place for it. This is a church where children go to, and parents can't have their children go to the bathroom when there might be a big naked guy behind the door. So it became my job to patrol the bathrooms. And it was one of the hardest learning experiences I've ever had. And I learned the same lesson over again. At first I would be nice and people would walk all over me. They would turn it around so it was all like I was the bad guy and all this stuff. And I just got sick of it. So I went in there with this attitude. And then I wouldn't necessarily yell, but I would talk to them in such a way where they would not have a chance to respond. I would let them know who was in charge and what exactly would happen if they didn't put their clothes on in that moment and get out of the church. And I developed this reputation. And then as the months went by, people grew to respect this person I had become, I guess, and it actually opened more doors than it closed, which really surprised me. But once again, I found myself in this place of authority. Now I go into a broken situation where poverty meets church and there's a big mess, but that's where this church was called to work. And I loved it. I really did. And so today we have the story of the binding of Isaac. And this is just another profoundly broken situation. And there's a lot that we're not told in the story, that we have to fill in the blanks with our own imagination and our own intelligence. We're not necessarily given Abraham's emotions or his thought processes as he ties his son to the altar. We are given clues as to what he was thinking. When God calls Abraham, Abraham replies, "Here I am, Lord." And this is a very, very common phrase throughout Hebrew Scripture. So when God calls people, the correct response is, "Here I am." This happens to Moses, to Samuel, with many of the prophets. It's almost a sacred response. It's a response you say to someone who you love. And then this one passage today, Abraham says this to God. And then when Isaac calls out to Abraham too, he says, "Here I am, my son." And so this implies some sort of dynamic in between Abraham and his son and God, where Abraham loves God and he wants to be obedient to God, and he loves Isaac and he wants to protect Isaac. But these two interests seem to be so fundamentally at odds with each other. And we're not given the inner thoughts of Isaac. Did he resist Abraham when he was being bound? And what about Sarah? She's not even mentioned. What would she think if Abraham came home alone? Did Abraham let her know? We don't know. But what we are given is this profoundly broken situation where Abraham is about to do something terrible to his son because he believes that will please God. Sacrifices in any culture are meant to appease God because the sacrifices themselves are meant to be pleasant. We see this in Leviticus and in other chapters of Genesis, where God says the smell of the burnt offering is pleasing. So this is the assumption that Abraham is probably going under, where the sacrifice itself is going to please God. It's not Abraham's intention or his faith, his loyalty. It's the act of death. But we learn this story. That's not the way that God works. Our God is not the God that kills his son, or has Abraham kill his son. Our God is the God that provides the ram caught in the thicket, so that does not have to happen. God stopped this. God showed up. And Abraham did not have to kill his son. And we learned that God is after a relationship, that God is after loyalty and love. That's what the angel of God says to Abraham when he stops Abraham from killing Isaac. That you have shown that you truly fear God, that you are obedient to God, that you love God. That's what God wanted the entire time. It's not about sacrifice. It's not about creating pleasant smells. It's about loyalty Abraham showed that. So at the Church of the Epiphany, there's a lot of broken people, broken things there. And it's more than just naked men in the bathroom. There's a lot of conflicts that would not show up in a normal parish. Because of mental illness and of poverty, a lot of the things that we use to hide our true feelings just melt away. And with my friend Nathan, he is very, very ill. He's maybe 45 years old, and he has severe schizophrenia along with a lot of other issues. And most of the time, he's actually nonverbal. He just has these fits, and he can't even talk. But he sits in the pew during every single church service we have, and he's in this position of prayer, just trying to remain still and trying to remain quiet. And witnessing this was beautiful and tragic all at the same time. And every once in a while, Nathan would have a good day, or he would be lucid. And so one of these days, I noticed he wasn't trembling. And I went up and talked to him, and I found this intelligent, compassionate, real human being. And I actually found out we're from the same small town in Michigan. And it was great. But then the next Sunday, he was back the way he was. And I didn't know this at the time, but every once in a while, his medicine gets mixed up. And when this happens, he can't control his delusions. And so one Sunday, I showed up and I was eating breakfast, and I noticed Nathan was behind me. And then I heard an explosion of activity, and Nathan was up, and he took his plate, and he threw it up against the wall, and he was leaning over, yelling at someone. And so that authority in me came out. And I tried to be this calming, this strong presence. I stood up, and I slowly started to follow Nathan. He was leaving the church quite quickly now. And I was just going to follow him out and let him go. But he noticed that I was following him. He turned around, and he started yelling at me. And I said, Nathan, you've got to go, you've got to go. So he kept on walking while he was yelling at me. He actually walked right into the front of the church, where there's still hundreds of people waiting to eat breakfast. And he got so close to my face, our noses were almost touching, and he was screaming at the top of his lungs. He even had his fist back, and he was telling me that he was going to bash my face in. And that pride and that authority in me gave me this stoic stance. I said, Nathan, you've got to go. And there was no way I was going to let him intimidate me. Like all those people in the EMS try to intimidate me to get in the way of my patient care. Because I thought God was calling me to be a source of order in the chaos, that I was going to be this person who was going to control the situation, and people were going to respect me, and the church was going to be safe because of it. And I was determined to be that. And at that moment, 5 people stood up in the pews and actually came to my defense. I was in awe that these people would put themselves at risk for my sake. It really just escalated the entire situation. And I really thought Nathan was going to punch me right in the face. And I was prepared for it. And then I was still all bowed up. And Nathan was there face to face with me. And then God showed up somehow. And instead of staying strong and staying stoic, I just felt my heart was kind of melt. Here was this profoundly compassionate, good guy in such a broken situation. I felt my shoulders just kind of relax. And I looked at him and I just felt so much love and sadness for him. I said, Nathan, please don't hurt me. And it was strange. I couldn't even imagine these words leaving my lips. But all of a sudden, they were there. And then I realized that my call from God was a lot bigger than I thought it was. All of that about having authority and being in control. Some of that was good, but a lot of that was just me. God's not calling me just to do that. Sometimes to do the work of God, you actually have to lay down your authority. And by doing that, it just diffused the entire situation. Nathan was still upset, but he walked right out of church without hurting anyone, including me. So everyone was safe, and I was not in control, but God was. So this is our God. Our God doesn't make mentally ill people. God doesn't create car wrecks. God doesn't want us to sacrifice our children to appease him. Instead, God's the person who shows up in the midst of all of the chaos and gives us the imagination that we are actually much more than we think that we are. We're rarely in control. That every once in a while, God can show up and show us that